Something buried deep inside the royal household has shaken Prince William to his core. A financial secret tied to Camilla, hidden, undisclosed, and completely unexplained. And what he found inside has sent the palace into a crisis nobody saw coming. The British royal family has never been a stranger to secrets. From Charles's cancer diagnosis, managed carefully behind closed doors before any public word was given, to decades of quiet institutional cover, the palace has always known how to keep its walls sealed. But William is no longer just a prince waiting in the wings. He is the future king. And that changes everything about what he is willing to tolerate and what he is willing to confront. When a financial anomaly surfaced inside the royal household, it did not stay quiet for long. Not with William involved. This investigation follows the money, through the accounts, through the access, and through the silence that surrounded it. Because what the money reveals is not just a number on a ledger, it is a question about power, loyalty, and who exactly has been operating in the shadows at the very heart of the crown. It began, according to palace insiders, with something almost routine. A standard internal review of royal household finances. The kind of procedural audit that runs quietly in the background, rarely flagging anything of significance. William was involved in that process in his capacity as the future head of the institution. And that is when something stopped him cold. A set of accounts appeared that had no business being there. Not flagged, not declared, not listed on any official royal financial register that William or his advisors could locate. These were not administrative oversights. They were not misplaced figures from a departmental budget. They were accounts, active, funded, and completely undisclosed. The locations attached to those accounts made the situation significantly more serious. Sources familiar with the review have cited Switzerland as one jurisdiction, Luxembourg as another, and the Cayman Islands, a name that carries its own unmistakable weight in any conversation about financial concealment. These are not places where money drifts by accident. These are places where money goes when someone wants it to be very difficult to find. Palace insiders who have spoken on the matter, carefully and without attribution, have confirmed that the accounts were never declared through the proper institutional channels. That is not a minor administrative gap. For a household operating under the level of public scrutiny and constitutional obligation that the British royal family faces, undisclosed offshore accounts represent something far more serious than a paperwork error. They represent a deliberate choice. Someone made a decision at some point under some authority to keep these accounts invisible. And that decision, once William became aware of it, was impossible to walk back. The review did not produce immediate answers. What it produced was a clear and undeniable signal that something had been structured over time to avoid detection. Financial experts consulted in the wake of similar royal financial controversies have noted that accounts held across multiple offshore jurisdictions, particularly Switzerland, Luxembourg, and the Caymans simultaneously, suggest a layered approach to asset protection. Not one account opened quietly, multiple accounts in multiple locations, each one adding another barrier between the money and anyone looking for it. William is said to have responded with the kind of controlled urgency that defines his approach to institutional threats. He did not panic. He did not immediately go public. Instead, according to those close to the situation, he began asking very specific questions. Questions that the palace was not prepared to answer quickly. Questions about authorization, about access, about who held signatory rights over accounts that were never supposed to exist on any official record. The name that kept surfacing in connection with those accounts was Camilla's. Not in a peripheral way, not as a minor administrative signatory attached to a broader fund. The connection, as William's team understood it, was direct. And that directness is what transformed a financial review into something the palace could not contain internally. Because the question is no longer simply whether undisclosed accounts exist. The accounts, by multiple accounts, do exist. The question, the one that William is now pressing with the full weight of his position, is who authorized them? When were they opened? Under what justification? And who inside the royal household knew and said nothing? Those questions do not have public answers yet. What they do have is a paper trail. And that trail, according to sources, runs deeper into the palace than anyone on the outside has been permitted to see. What William found at the end of that trail is what has thrown the institution into a reckoning it was never designed to face. The accounts were just the beginning. The financial documents, according to sources familiar with the investigation, point to a pattern of undisclosed transfers spanning several years. Not a single transaction, not an oversight, a pattern, methodical, repeated, and, until now, entirely invisible to the public record. Here is what the paper trail reportedly shows. Multiple account holders are named across a series of internal financial records connected to the royal household. None of those names have ever been publicly acknowledged in any official capacity. That is not an administrative gap. That is a choice. Someone, at some level of the institution, made a deliberate decision that these accounts would not see the light of day. The transfers themselves follow a structure that financial investigators describe as consistent with long-term fund management outside of standard royal financial reporting frameworks. In plain terms, the money was moving regularly, and the channels it moved through were not the ones subject to routine oversight. Sources indicate the documentation stretches back further than the current reign. That detail alone changes the scale of what we are looking at. And then there is the matter of where the trail leads. Because every line of financial documentation, every account reference, every named holder, it all connects back to one place, the royal household itself. Not a distant associate, not a third-party contractor operating at arm's length. The palace, the institution at the very centre of the British monarchy, is, according to these sources, the origin point of the paper trail that William reportedly followed to its end. Harry's own words add a layer of context that is difficult to ignore here. In his memoir, he wrote at length about the coordinated effort to rehabilitate Camilla's public image, an effort he described as deliberate, sustained, and funded in ways that were never fully explained to him or to the public. He named the operation directly. He described meetings, strategies, and resources being deployed to shift the narrative around the woman who would become Queen Consort. At the time, many dismissed that account as the grievances of an estranged son. But placed alongside this financial documentation, Harry's words carry a different weight entirely. Because if money was being moved through undisclosed channels, and if a parallel effort was simultaneously underway to reframe a public figure's reputation at significant institutional cost, the question that follows is not a small one. It is the question that reportedly stopped William cold when he reached the end of that trail. What was the money actually being used for? Not where it came from, not who held the accounts. Those details, troubling as they are almost secondary now. The deeper question is about purpose. About what an institution with unlimited resources, a centuries-old mandate for secrecy, and a vested interest in controlling its own narrative was quietly funding, and why it needed to be hidden at all. That question does not have a clean answer yet, and the people inside the palace who know the answer have, so far, chosen silence. But as we are about to see, silence inside that institution has a way of becoming impossible to maintain when the person asking the questions is the future King of England. William said it himself. In his own words, on the record, he stated that the monarchy must be, and this is his phrasing, fit for purpose today. Not fit for purpose as it was designed, not fit for purpose as tradition demands, today. That single word is doing enormous work. It signals something that the palace establishment has spent decades resisting. The acknowledgement that what has always been done is not necessarily what should continue to be done. That public statement was not made in a vacuum. Sources close to the palace describe a period of intense internal confrontation in which William pushed back directly against the institutional machinery that had for generations operated with near total autonomy from the family it ostensibly served. Advisors, senior courtiers, officials whose titles date back centuries and whose loyalty is to the crown as a concept, not to any individual who wears it. William, according to these accounts, was not interested in deference. He wanted answers. The confrontation placed Charles in an almost impossible position. On one side, his son, the heir to the throne, the future of the institution, a man with both the standing and the will to demand accountability. On the other side, the palace establishment itself, the apparatus that had protected the monarchy through abdication crises, through Diana, through the Andrew scandal, through every rupture the modern era had thrown at the crown. Charles has spent his entire adult life navigating the tension between family and institution. He built his reign on the promise that he could modernize without destabilizing. William's confrontation forced him to choose a side, and choosing a side in this context means consequences. Those consequences reportedly took a specific form. Sources indicate that title threats and internal sanctions were discussed at the highest levels of palace decision-making during this period. The suggestion that certain individuals, and the accounts differ on exactly who, could face formal consequences for their role in what the financial documents appear to show. The fact that such discussions happened at all is significant. The palace does not threaten its own. That is not how the institution functions. Sanctions are for outsiders, for those who have broken with the family and gone public. The idea that they were being discussed internally about people still inside the household tells you something about how seriously William's discovery was being taken. And yet, the establishment did not simply capitulate. It never does. The machinery of institutional self-preservation is old, and it is practiced, and it knows how to absorb pressure from within. Delays, procedural obstacles, the quiet suggestion that certain things, however troubling, are better handled through channels that have always existed for exactly this kind of sensitivity. William has faced that resistance before. He has watched it work. He has watched it absorb his brother, absorb his mother's legacy, absorb every challenge that threatened to force genuine change. The question now is whether this time is different, whether what he found in those financial documents gave him something the institution could not procedurally absorb, and whether he was willing to use it. How far William was prepared to push this is the question that every person inside that palace was quietly asking. The answer, when it came, surprised even those who thought they knew him. Camilla herself put it on record. In a BBC interview that received far less attention than it deserved, she spoke openly about the culture of secrecy inside the palace, describing the personal vulnerability that came with navigating an institution that, in her words, did not always prepare you for what was coming. It was framed as candor, as the hard-won honesty of a woman who had survived extraordinary public scrutiny. And on one level, it was exactly that. But that interview now reads differently, because candor about institutional secrecy, offered voluntarily in a controlled media setting, is also a form of positioning. It places the speaker on record as someone who acknowledges the problem, someone who is not complicit in the silence, but a fellow traveler who found it difficult. That framing matters enormously when questions about financial accountability begin circulating in serious circles. And those questions are circulating. A figure of £8.5 million, described by sources in palace accountability discussions as connected to offshore financial structures, has reportedly surfaced in the context of the broader investigation into undisclosed transfers. 8.5 million. Offshore. The language used by sources to describe this figure is careful and deliberate. They do not place it in Camilla's hands directly, but they place it in her orbit, in the same financial architecture that the paper trail William followed appears to have mapped. The rehabilitation narrative that Harry described in such specific terms in his memoir now becomes a critical piece of context. He wrote about resources being deployed, about a long-term strategy to reframe public perception of the woman who would become Queen Consort. At the time, the natural reading of that account was political. The palace wanted a smoother path to Camilla's acceptance, and it spent institutional capital, meaning time and influence, and carefully managed media relationships to get there. But institutional capital and financial capital are not always separate things. If the rehabilitation effort was as coordinated and as sustained as Harry described, and if there were undisclosed financial structures running in parallel during the same period, then the question of whether those two things were connected is not a speculative leap. It is the next logical step in any serious accounting of what actually happened. Camilla's public image has been one of the monarchy's most carefully managed projects of the last 2 decades. The journey from the most hated woman in Britain, that was the actual phrase used by tabloids at the height of Diana's public mourning, to Queen Consort is a story of extraordinary image management. It required years of patient repositioning, sympathetic coverage, and the gradual softening of a public that had made its feelings very clear. That kind of transformation does not happen by accident. It does not happen through goodwill alone. It is engineered. And engineering costs something. What it cost, and who paid for it, and through which accounts, and with whose knowledge, those are the questions that the financial documents now appear to be forcing into the open. Which brings us to the question that may be the most consequential of all. Charles has been at the center of this story from the beginning. His relationship with Camilla, his path to the throne, his management of the institution through crisis after crisis. If undisclosed financial structures were operating within the household he now leads, structures connected to the rehabilitation of the woman he married, there are only 2 possibilities. Either Charles did not know, or he did. And the answer to that question changes everything about what happens next. By the time Parliament's Financial Oversight Committee received the first briefing, the crisis had already moved beyond the palace walls. That is the specific claim, and the details that followed it only made the picture darker. Palace auditors were not the first to flag the anomalies. According to sources familiar with the review process, external parliamentary advisors were quietly looped in before any formal announcement was made. That is not standard procedure. That is containment protocol. The kind used when the institution already knows the exposure is serious enough to require political cover. Then came the Clarence House question. Buckingham Palace's future as a working royal residence had already been under discussion. Renovation costs, operational restructuring, the long-term viability of maintaining the building as a seat of institutional power. But those conversations shifted tone the moment the financial review expanded. What had been a logistical question about bricks and budgets became something else entirely. A question about what kind of monarchy would occupy that building, and whether the people meant to lead it could be trusted to do so cleanly. The monarchy was being forced to reckon with what had been buried, not for months, for years. William understood this, and the people close to him say that understanding changed something in him. Not the prince, not the heir, the father. When the scope of what had been concealed inside Clarence House became clear to him, his instinct was not institutional, it was parental. He has spent years building a version of the monarchy that his children could inherit without apology. A version defined by transparency, by earned trust, by the kind of credibility that doesn't depend on what stays hidden. What he found threatened all of it, and he responded accordingly. Sources close to the Wales household describe a man who is not interested in protecting the past. He is interested in protecting the future. Those are not the same thing. And inside the palace, the difference between those two positions is now the fault line everything else runs along. But here is where the open loop tightens. The accounts at the center of this investigation, the ones William's team identified, the ones that drew in auditors and parliamentary advisors and triggered the quiet restructuring of Clarence House's financial operations, their full contents have never been disclosed. Not to the press, not to the public. Possibly not even to every member of the family with a stake in what they contain. The question is not just what was in those accounts. The question is, what was done with what was in them? Whether money moved, whether records were altered, whether the structures that housed those funds were designed to survive scrutiny or to avoid it entirely. Parliament has been briefed, auditors have been engaged. The machinery of institutional accountability is turning. But the final answer, the one that tells us exactly what William found, and exactly what it means for the woman who now holds the title of Queen Consort, that answer is still locked behind closed doors. And the people who hold the key are not talking. Yet. The monarchy's credibility now rests entirely on what William decides to do next, and history will not allow him to look away. Subscribe now and drop your verdict in the comments. Did William do the right thing?